Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the AWS Summit here in Washington, D.C. My name is Jeff Reichard. I'm the Vice President of Compliance and Public Sector Strategy with Veeam Government Solutions, which means I spend a lot of time talking with our public sector customers and a lot of time talking with industry analysts about challenges that our customers, in particular in the public sector, are facing right now. We're going to talk today about malware and protecting your organization from malware. There's going to be a lot of focus on ransomware because that tends to be the most prevalent out there, but the kind of principles we're going to talk about in terms of secure data protection apply really to anybody who gets on the network and puts bad things on your servers or workloads. So let's go ahead and jump in. These are stats from this year's Sophos State of Ransomware report. They tend to do the biggest report that's done by any analyst or vendor out there. This year, they interviewed about 5,600 folks worldwide. And I'm going to start with the bottom stat on this. If you'll notice, 2/3 of organizations, of these 5,600 global organizations surveyed, were hit by ransomware last year. The average ransom paid is now up to $812,000 globally. And by the way, that's after they exclude the outliers. So things like the $40 million ransomware payment that was made by one organization last year are excluded from this. This is deliberately designed to be a representative sample. The number of $1 million plus ransoms that were demanded last year went up by over 3 times. So the business model is definitely accelerating for ransomware adversaries. The average time to recover, you can see here, is 1 month. And we're going to talk a lot about what's involved in a real-world ransomware malware attack recovery process. And you'll also notice that because of that average time to recover, because we're looking at 1 month plus to get back up and running, the costs are very high, right? There's a lot of remediation costs. There's a lot of direct, straight-up losses. But today's conversation is about protecting data, and so I'm going to share with you some more stats from the same report that aren't on the slide right now. When organizations were attacked by ransomware, 65% had data encrypted, so almost 2/3. 46%, almost half, actually paid the ransom when they were asked for it. Now, a few of these organizations that paid the ransom got lucky, and by a few, 4% actually got all of their data back after paying a ransom. The average amount of data that was recovered, according to Sophos in this year's survey, the average amount of data that was recovered was 66%, right? Exactly 2/3 of data. By the way, Veeam, enterprise backup company, we have a pretty robust research arm ourselves. These numbers confirm exactly what we heard in a survey that we did last year, about 1,200 folks that we interviewed. And on average, organizations, whether they paid a ransom or not, got back about 2/3 of their data or a little bit less. This is why today's talk focuses on data protection, because as you can see from these numbers, there's no guarantee that if you're attacked, you're actually going to get the data back, even if you pay a ransom, even if you comply. Unfortunately, the likelihood of attack is very, very high. On average, 80% of internet email traffic is spam, designed to get successful attacks into your environment. And for this reason, we've seen initiatives like the recent Zero Trust Initiative, especially in the federal government, designed to make sure that there are multiple layers of defense in your organization. Veeam's own Chief Information Security Officer, Gil Vega, has senior executive service experience, a cyber leadership experience in the Department of Homeland Security and in the Department of Energy. Gil likes to say you should assume a state of constant breach, and I'm sure that the security teams in your organization have the same feedback for you. You should figure an adversary is already on the network and design your policies, design your data protection, design everything around securing the environment with that notion in mind. Because we're not in a position right now where we have the luxury of assuming that the perimeter is safe and that the bad guys haven't gotten onto the network. Because of this, because the bad guys have basically infinite attempts to get on the network and we have to get everything right every time, fast response and fast detection is really key to responding well to adversaries getting on and doing ransomware or other malware attacks. But protecting data well is also key. Let's talk about where that breaks down. I think that probably all of us with security background are familiar with people talking about people, processes, and technology around securing your environment. People, processes, and technology are also responsible for your environment not being as secure as you'd like it to be. These are just some representative examples, and I'll start on the bottom left and go to the right. Alert fatigue. Probably most of you remember the 2013 Target data breach. They were severely embarrassed. They had shareholder lawsuits and other lawsuits about the amount of data that got exfiltrated from their environment. Their security systems alerted on the invasion. They alerted on the fact that there were bad guys on the network. But the security team was so overwhelmed with other alerts that they basically just missed the signals in the midst of the noise, and the attack happened successfully. Missing patches. I think probably a lot of you remember the large Kronos ransomware attack that happened in December of last year. There were a lot of public sector organizations, the City of Cleveland, New York Public Transit, a lot of other organizations that relied on Kronos to handle their payroll processing. The vulnerability that allowed Kronos to be exploited and took their system down in some cases for some users for a period of months was a Citrix patch that had actually been patched 2 years ago. It was a known vulnerability that they had not updated. 2 years ago, it had been discovered. And that took down a lot of organizations, including a lot of public sector organizations. Poor password policies. If you ever talk with someone in the cyber insurance business, and I did with an insurance tech firm a few weeks ago, there are 3 things that organizations can do that reduce claim size from a ransomware attack by 85%. One of those is multi-factor authentication, right? Fortunately, most of my federal customers have a good handle on multi-factor authentication and have for a while. But if there are any parts of your environment that are not using that around security, around your passwords, then you need to think about it. Lack of network segmentation. I think probably everybody here remembers the NotPetya attacks back in 2017, $10 billion worth of damage worldwide. One of the companies that was strongly hit by NotPetya was Merck, the big global pharmaceutical company. Merck actually has been in litigation until December of this past year because their cyber insurance company refused to pay because NotPetya was deemed to be an act of war by Russia directed against the Ukraine. It was actually, even though it displayed a ransomware message, the NotPetya attack had no way to decrypt the data. It wasn't designed actually as ransomware. It was purely destructive in intent. Merck's damage from this was $1.4 billion. They've been in court the last 5 years about it. Their first point of penetration was a laptop in the United Kingdom. They didn't have good network segmentation, so it was able to spread through the entire environment, including shutting down drug fabrication plants as far away as Asia. So network segmentation is a critical thing to think about so that any attack does actually get contained when an adversary gets in your environment. I mentioned there were 3 things that can reduce the impact of a ransomware attack by up to 85%. At least that's what cyber insurance companies have found. A tested incident response time plan, including a tested plan that finds out how long you can actually, how quickly you can actually recover using your backups, is one of those key points. The third point, by the way, is immutable backups, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in the course of today's talk. But you should have tested response plans, not just for ransomware, but for other kinds of attacks, business email compromise, other kinds of adversarial attacks. Misconfiguration. News stories come out all the time about NAS devices and network devices, including security ones, that still have the default password and default admin account enabled on them. That is a very clear vector that's still used all the time. And especially now, after we've had 2 years plus of dealing with the response to the COVID pandemic, remote citizen services, remote work, remote everything, a lot of migrations to new platforms, it's really important that when we move up to cloud platforms or up to new services, we take the discipline and maturity that we had when those apps were in the data center and move that to the cloud as well. I've talked with a lot of customers who in the last couple of years, in the rush to do something right now, to be able to provide remote citizen services or to be able to support remote work, they did it right now, but they didn't do it right? They need to secure the environment in the new location. I also speak with a lot of customers who are not entirely clear on the shared responsibility model that Amazon and every other cloud service provider have for the services that they provide. If you guys look at your service level agreements with any of the vendors that you rely on for cloud, those service level agreements have remedies related to uptime. They do not have remedies related to data loss. And Amazon and every other cloud service provider are very clear that it's ultimately your responsibility to meet your compliance mandates. It's your responsibility to back up and protect your data. So let's look at 5 ways, and this is basically vendor independent. I'm going to talk about some Veeam capabilities later in the talk, but whatever your data protection tool of choice is, these are some practices that can help you. I think probably a lot of you in the audience recognize the NIST cybersecurity framework, the 5 function areas of the cybersecurity framework. We follow this internally. I know that a lot of critical infrastructure companies and a lot of civilian public sector agencies also follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. It has 5 functional areas: identify what you've got, protect it, detect an attack, respond, and then recover from the attack. Now, you might think that an enterprise backup company like Veeam is very, very strong in the areas of protecting and in the areas of recovering, and you'd be right. We do have good capabilities there. But the point that I want to make is that Veeam actually has capabilities that map all the way around the wheel here in identifying what you have, in automating the response, and in making sure that when you're recovering from an attack, you do it without reintroducing malware back into your environment. We're not alone. Pardon me. We're not alone in that. There are other tools that you can use that will give you some of these capabilities. But it's important when you're thinking about your data protection environment that you look at all the capabilities that are present in whatever your tool set is and leverage them for all of these 5 functional areas. I like talking about the NIST cybersecurity framework not just because Veeam follows it internally, but because even if you're a technical person, a data center guy like me, or a backup manager, a security expert, you can explain these 5 functional domains to upper management that maybe doesn't have that many technical skills. It's easy to explain the idea of identifying what I've got, protecting it, detecting, responding, and recovering. If you've ever talked with Veeam about our solutions, you've probably heard us mention the 3-2-1 rule. Veeam did not actually invent the 3-2-1 rule. It was invented years ago by a digital photographer who wanted to figure out the best way to protect all of his work product. We have since, in the age of ransomware and other malware attacks, expanded the 3-2-1 rule to the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. All this basically says is that if you want your data to be genuinely safe, you need to have 3 copies, 1 production copy and 2 backups. They need to be on 2 different types of media, and 1 of those copies has to be off-site. And again, the 3-2-1 rule did not originate with Veeam. It's been around for many years. It's just general best practices. I will point out the 3-2-1 rule also applies if you've moved workloads up into a cloud service provider. You should have backups that are on different media, that is, that are not just snapshots on the same storage as your production data workloads are on. And you should have a copy off-site, because ultimately you're responsible for FOIA requests or for security inquiries or for any kind of contracting or purchasing inquiries that your organization has to field, right? The 1 and the 0 on the end. The second one is totally related to ransomware and other malware attacks. And that is just that 1 of their copies of backup data should be offline or immutable or air-gapped. Immutable is just a fancy way of saying it shouldn't be able to be changed for a specified length of time after you take your backup. There are a lot of ways to do this. Amazon S3 Storage has actually one of the best ways to do this, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But there are other tools, even tapes that are taken out of the tape library, or purpose-built backup appliances with retention lock enabled. All of those things can provide the ability to have an immutable copy of the data. You have to do that because ransomware and other malware actors know perfectly well that if they delete the backups, they have a much better chance of extorting a payment from you. And so backups are always targeted now. And it's critical that you harden the backup infrastructure and especially that you have immutable or offline or air-gapped storage. And finally, I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and I have lost count of the number of times that I've talked to customers who thought they had a good backup, but they had missed a step in configuration, like in one case, not formatting the backup tapes for years, and they were just completely lucky that they never had an outage. But even other things like not realizing all of the components of your application stack and neglecting to back up some critical component so that when you need to restore, you can't actually do that. You can't actually get your application functional again. Veeam has built in a couple of capabilities around that I'll talk about later on. But it's very, very important that you be able to make sure that your backups are fit for purpose and that you have an automated way to avoid restoring malware back in your environment if you are victim of a ransomware attack. So I mentioned the S3 capability that really helps with immutable storage. How many people here are familiar with S3 Object Lock? Okay, great. Most of the folks in the room. S3 Object Lock is a really great way of making sure that your storage stays safe. S3 Object Lock in compliance mode is basically the gold standard for ransomware-proof cloud storage. Object Lock in compliance mode was designed for a completely different use case that has nothing to do with ransomware. It was designed for regulated entities, so publicly traded companies or trading companies that have to be responsive to FINRA or to the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, to be able to post financial records or other results and to be able to guarantee their regulators, we haven't messed with them. We uploaded them, but we're not cooking the books. Now these financial returns, these financial results that we've posted are legit, and we can't change them even if we want to. That's the compliance part of compliance mode. It turns out that that kind of a solution, which is designed to show that even an administrator with the CEO standing over him saying, change this, can't change it, turns out to be a perfect solution for protecting against ransomware. The reason for that is that, as probably I think all of you know, once an adversary gets on the network, they tend to dwell on the network for quite a while. They're going to spread horizontally. They're going to try to escalate privileges. They're going to do research to find out where your critical data is. And they're going to try to compromise as much of that data as they can, steal it. For private sector firms, dwell time has been going down as ransomware actors get better at what they do. It was an average of 24 days on the network for the last 2 years. Last year, that dropped, at least according to Mandiant, down to 21 days. But as I think everybody here knows, for government agencies, it's a completely different story. Adversaries could have very different purposes, not just detonating a ransomware attack, right? And they could stay on the network for months, and frequently will attempt to stay on the network for months to get as much as they can. So it's really, really important that you've got the ability to lock down your backups so that they can't be deleted, even if an adversary has gotten admin credentials for your backup infrastructure and for your storage infrastructure and for everything else. And S3 Object Lock in compliance mode is a fantastic solution for doing that. If you think about it, it gets a lot of the boxes checked for the 3-2-1 rule, right? It's the 2 because it's a second type of media. It's the 1 because it's off-site, it's up in AWS's cloud, and it's the second one because it's immutable. Veeam has a lot of optimizations that also make recovering from this kind of storage very, very fast to do. Now, I just alluded to the idea that an adversary is going to attempt to compromise admin credentials, especially backup admin credentials when they're on the network. It used to be that Veeam's best practice that we recommended to customers, and I think a lot of organizations' best practice, was to have, for example, a group of backup administrators in Active Directory, and those folks would have certain granular role-based access permissions to do things in the Veeam environment. At this point, we typically recommend that the accounts used to administer Veeam be local accounts, not be Active Directory accounts, because Active Directory is always, always, always a target for adversaries, right? That advice, by the way, is pretty consistent across a lot of enterprise backup companies now. The more that you can isolate the context, the security context of your data protection from the security context of your production data, the happier you're going to be if you're in a situation where your environment's compromised and you've got an adversary on the network. And finally, and this kind of goes along with the exact point that we just made before, It's very, very helpful, especially given the zero trust mandates that federal organizations are facing right now. You want to make sure that you have role-based access controls and that you let people have only the minimum amount of permissions required to do their job. That includes backup administrators, but it includes other kinds of administrators too. It includes storage administrators in particular, right? There are great solutions out there that can overcome the compromise of storage credentials. Pure backups in safe mode are an example because you need actually to interact with the vendor to get rid of those snapshots. But it's an important point that you want to make sure that you're granting people as few permissions as possible in the environment, and that when people leave the environment, you have an automated, documented process for actually getting them out of the environment too, right? For getting those old credentials rotated out. These are past the 5 points that we talked about before, but there's just a few other ones that I will mention. I talked about multi-factor authentication earlier as an idea that cyber insurers at least have found partly reduces claim size by 85%. Again, fortunately, at least our federal customers have a pretty good handle on this. But role-based access control is another critical one, and using some of the tools that are out there, in particular in AWS environments, things like AWS Key Management Services, so that you can encrypt the data that you put up in the cloud and have a good way to keep track of that and manage the security context around that. We've talked a lot today about backup so far. I just want to point out, especially given the digital transformation that many of you all's organizations have already gone through, the migration to new platforms, the migration to new locations, data up in the cloud that used to be on-prem. It's important to think about how you're actually protecting that data. In many cases, the solutions that have worked fine when workloads were on-prem aren't going to work very well when workloads go up into AWS. They might require you to install agents to back up infrastructure as a service instead of actually handling it natively at the hypervisor level. They might not stretch across multiple clouds, and Veeam's research has shown that the overwhelming majority of organizations, both public and private sector, aren't just in one cloud or one cloud service, they're in multiple clouds. Hybrid multi-cloud deployments are overwhelmingly the norm right now. And legacy backup frequently doesn't integrate well with things like S3 object lock and compliance mode, and so it can't give you the protections that you need from adversaries on the network. The other thing to think about is, while there are very good platform native options out there, so backup tools that are born in the cloud that maybe are backup as a service, they tend to lock you in terms of your options. It can be very expensive if you use one of those and you decide to change directions, or you need to get data back on-prem from the cloud to get the data out. You might find yourself paying egress fees to do something like that, or given not very much time or flexibility in how you actually recover from as-a-service cloud-native backup utilities. Veeam thinks we've taken a pretty good approach to this. We've got a platform I'll talk about on the next slide. But it's very, very important to remember, you need to make sure you own your data at all times, that basically, even if it's being backed up by a service provider, you have easy and effective ways to get that data out. Those of you who know Veeam probably know us because we have led in backing up virtualized environments, in particular VMware, for the last 13 years. But as the conversation that we've just had, and as the slide here shows, it goes far beyond that. The platforms that are supported right now include, obviously, AWS workloads, but they also include physical and other virtualization platforms on-prem. They include Kubernetes. For those of you that are using Kubernetes, we actually have a product called Kasten K10 that is the leading Kubernetes backup and cloud mobility product that's on the market. We also have the leading solution for backing up Microsoft 365, and we will soon release a backup utility for Salesforce. That'll be coming out in the second half of this year. In terms of integration with AWS specifically, so far in the conversation, I've been talking about the right column up above, basically backing your data up to the cloud, doing disaster recovery to the cloud, having ransomware protection with S3 object lock, and having the ability to de-risk a migration. And I've had many conversations with both public and private sector customers where they were ready to migrate, but their leadership had to make sure that they could get their data back out of the cloud easily and cost effectively if they needed to. But I'll also mention Veeam has a leading cloud-native backup capability for AWS, both platform as a service, things like RDS, and for EC2. So if you all are well along the path in migrating to AWS services, Veeam can natively protect all of that very easily and cost effectively. And again, that also includes, for example, things like if you're using Kubernetes based in AWS. We have been hard at work integrating Veeam services with the native AWS capabilities around security and platform for quite a while now. I won't go through all of these, but I have mentioned a lot our integration with S3 in the course of this talk. We also integrate with other tiers of storage, with infrastructure, including relational database services and a lot of other infrastructure capabilities. We support AWS Outposts. We support VMware Cloud on AWS, and obviously hybrid cloud. And we also go through a large number of security and service integrations, including the ability to get notifications through SNS or queuing through Amazon SQS. Veeam products that protect AWS natively can be bought either from value-added reseller, whoever the partner is you normally work with, or directly in the AWS marketplace, including in AWS GovCloud, which we've supported for quite a while now. And that is what I had for you today. Let me ask in the audience, any questions about the conversation that we've had? No? Good? All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today. There is a survey on the mobile app for the session, and if you've got any feedback, we would love to get it. I hope you have a great rest of the show. Enjoy your day.